The rain came down like the sky had broken. Cold, relentless, drenching everything in its path. It wasn't just a drizzle, or a storm, it was a downpour so intense the streets of Briarwood looked like small rivers, water rushing along the gutters and pouring off rooftops in thick streams. Lightning tore across the sky like veins of fire, followed by thunder that made windows rattle. And in the middle of that chaos, a police cruiser rolled slowly down the empty street, its wipers struggling to keep the windshield clear. Officer Daniel Reyes was nearing the end of his shift, and he was exhausted. Not just physically, but emotionally. The kind of tired that sinks into your bones and makes you question why you keep showing up. He'd done 12 years on the force, and Briarwood had worn him thin. The city wasn't just rough, it was neglected. Broken. A place where sirens were more common than birdsong and hope was a luxury few could afford. But still, he showed up. Not for the badge. Not even for the paycheck. But for the chance, just the chance, to do something good. Something that mattered. That's when he saw her. It happened so fast, at first he wasn't even sure it was real. A small figure darted into the road, right in front of his cruiser. He slammed on the brakes, tires skidding slightly on the wet asphalt. His heart jumped into his throat, but the figure didn't get hit, it ran straight to his driver's side window, pounding on the glass with tiny fists. He blinked the rain out of his eyes. A little girl. No older than 7. Soaked to the skin, wearing nothing but a pink nightgown that clung to her like wet paper. Her bare feet were muddy, and her dark hair stuck to her cheeks in thick strands. She was clutching something, a teddy bear, soaked and sagging in her arms. Her face was contorted with fear. Panic. Desperation. "Please," she shouted through the glass. "Please help me. Please come with me. My mommy won't wake up." Reyes didn't hesitate. He threw open the door, stepped out into the rain, and knelt down in front of her. Hey, slow down," he said, trying to keep his voice calm even though his heart was racing. "What's your name?" "Emma," she cried. "My name is Emma. Please, you have to come now." "Okay, Emma. I'm coming. Where do you live?" She didn't answer. She just grabbed his hand and started running, pulling him down the sidewalk like her small legs were made of fire. Reyes followed, his boots splashing through puddles, his mind already preparing for the worst. They turned down a narrow street lined with crumbling houses and flickering streetlights. Many of the windows were boarded up. A few yards ahead, Emma stopped in front of a small, dilapidated house with peeling paint and a sagging roof. The front door was open, wide open, and the porch light buzzed like it was on its last breath. "She's inside," Emma whispered, her voice cracking. "Please don't let her die." Reyes radioed for an ambulance before he stepped inside. The smell hit him first, a mix of dampness, mold, and something sour. The living room was a mess. Trash scattered across the floor. A TV on with no sound. And on the couch, a woman lay motionless. Her skin was pale. Lips slightly blue. Eyes closed. Empty pill bottles littered the coffee table. Reyes rushed over, checked her pulse, faint, but there. He grabbed the radio again. "Dispatch, we've got a possible overdose. Send medics now. She's alive but unresponsive." Behind him, Emma stood in the doorway, her small chest heaving as tears streamed silently down her face. She looked like she wanted to cry out, to scream, to collapse. But she didn't. She just stood there, clutching her teddy bear like it was the only thing keeping her together. When the paramedics arrived, Reyes stayed by Emma's side. He held her hand as they loaded her mother onto a stretcher and carried her out into the storm. Emma tried to follow, but Reyes gently held her back. "They're going to take care of her," he said. "They'll do everything they can. I promise." She nodded, but she didn't believe him. Not really. Because children like her, from places like Briarwood, knew better than to believe in promises. At the hospital, Reyes refused to leave her. When the social worker came, when the doctors asked questions, when the forms had to be filled out, he stayed. Emma sat quietly in a chair too big for her, wrapped in a blanket someone had given her. Her feet dangled above the floor. Her teddy bear sat on her lap, dripping slowly into her blanket. She looked at the adults moving around her with eyes that were too old for her age. Eyes that had seen too much. "She's 7, the social worker explained. No known family in the area. Father passed away 2 years ago. Mother, Sophie Carter, has a history of depression, job loss, and instability. There have been no prior CPS calls, no school reports, but there's clearly been a buildup." Reyes nodded but said nothing. He was still thinking about the house. The way the dishes had piled in the sink. The thin mold creeping along the wall. The coldness in the air. It wasn't just neglect, it was despair. This wasn't a woman who wanted to die. It was a woman who didn't know how to keep going. And the only thing holding her together had been a 7-year-old girl in a nightgown. That night, Emma was placed with a temporary foster family. Reyes watched her leave in the back of a state vehicle, her blanket wrapped tightly around her shoulders, her bear held under her chin. She didn't cry. She didn't wave. She just stared out the window as the car disappeared into the rain. For the first time in years, Reyes felt something break inside him. He had seen drug raids, shootings, domestic violence, but nothing hurt like this. Nothing hollowed him out the way Emma's face did. That night, he went home to his apartment, sat on his couch, and didn't move for hours. The rain tapped against the windows like fingers trying to get in. Over the next few days, he kept checking the hospital's status reports. Sophie Carter had survived. She was transferred to a psychiatric rehabilitation center upstate. Medically stable, emotionally fragile. She'd been unconscious for nearly 12 hours. No suicide note. No last words. Just silence. She was lucky to be alive. But her recovery would take time. Months, maybe more. Emma, meanwhile, was floating in the system. The foster family she'd been placed with was well-meaning, but overburdened. Reyes heard rumors she was withdrawn, not speaking, barely eating. No school enrollment yet. No visitors. When he asked if he could check in on her, the system gave him a polite but firm no. "You're not family," they said. "You're not her guardian." But something about that didn't sit right. He had seen how she ran to him, how she trusted him in her worst moment. And now, she was alone again. That wasn't right. That wasn't justice. So he made a decision that surprised even himself. He filed a formal petition to become her temporary foster guardian. His captain thought he was joking. "You? A single guy with no kids? Dan, come on." "I'm not trying to adopt her," Reyes replied. "I'm just trying to give her stability. Until her mother gets better. Do you know how much red tape that's gonna take? I don't care." And he didn't. He went through the process. The forms. The background checks. The home inspection. Interviews. Counseling sessions. It took weeks. And in the meantime, Emma stayed where she was, drifting. When the court finally approved the emergency placement, Reyes drove to the foster home with more nerves than he'd ever had on duty. He brought her a new coat, some clothes, and a pair of boots. She met him at the door with that same blank stare. But when he knelt and offered the boots, she blinked, and then threw her arms around him. "Can I come with you now?" she whispered. "Yes," he said. "You can come home." Emma's transition into Reyes's apartment wasn't smooth, but it was quiet, and quiet was a gift neither of them had known in a long time. She didn't speak much at first, and when she did, it was usually one-word answers or murmured responses under her breath. She wandered the small apartment with hesitant steps, like each room was a puzzle she had to solve, unsure what she was allowed to touch or sit on or open. Reyes, for his part, had never lived with a child before. He didn't know what toys to buy or what food she liked. He made grilled cheese the first night and served it with a bowl of soup, only to watch her pick at the bread with her fingers like she'd forgotten what meals were supposed to be. She didn't complain. She didn't even look up. She just ate in silence, knees pulled to her chest, the teddy bear sitting beside her on the kitchen chair. The next day, he took a day off and drove her to a small department store. He let her pick out 2 outfits, a backpack, and a stuffed animal that wasn't soaked from rainwater. She chose a blue hoodie and a pair of glittery sneakers. But she never let go of the original bear. It was hers. It had survived the storm with her. At night, she slept in the second bedroom, the one Reyes had used for storage before all this. He cleared it out, laid down a mattress, and bought a lavender-colored blanket with stars on it. The first few nights, she stayed awake for hours, eyes open, fixed on the ceiling. Some nights, he'd hear her crying into her pillow, soft and muffled, the kind of crying that wasn't just sadness, it was mourning. Not just for her mother, but for the loss of the world she once knew. Reyes never pried. He just let her cry. Sometimes he'd sit by her door, just to let her know she wasn't alone. Eventually, she began to sleep. Not well. Not deeply. But she slept. Time passed. Not in big dramatic leaps, but in slow, steady moments. Reyes enrolled her in a nearby elementary school. She was behind academically, but the teacher was kind and the counselor made a point to check in with her every day. Slowly, Emma started to talk more. She'd tell him what she learned at school, what kids said at lunch, how she hated math but liked reading. She drew pictures and taped them to the fridge. Her handwriting was messy. Her drawings usually included a sun, a house, and a little girl standing next to a tall man with dark hair and a badge on his chest. Reyes kept every one of them. One afternoon, a few weeks into her stay, Emma brought home a form from school, Family Day. Parents invited. Art projects. Cupcakes. Reyes felt a lump in his throat when she handed it to him. She didn't say a word. She just placed it on the table, stared at him for a long second, and then walked to her room. He showed up to Family Day in full uniform. He brought cupcakes from a local bakery and sat beside Emma as she showed him the clay sculpture she'd made. It was lumpy and uneven, but unmistakably a house. "It's our house," she said shyly, and for the first time, he saw her smile stretch all the way to her eyes. That night, he cried in the shower, because he didn't know what to do with a heart that hurt and healed at the same time. Meanwhile, Sophie was recovering, slowly. The rehab center sent weekly updates. She was attending therapy. Taking medication regularly. Writing letters. The first few were short and awkward, barely a paragraph, filled with guilt and apologies. Emma wouldn't read them. She'd just fold them and tuck them under her pillow. But by the 5th letter, something shifted. Sophie wrote about a memory, Emma's 4th birthday, when they had no money for a cake, so she made one from pancakes and jelly. Emma read that one twice. Then 3 times. Then started writing back. It wasn't a fairy tale. Some days, Emma didn't want to talk about her mom at all. Other days, she asked questions Reyes didn't know how to answer. Why didn't anyone help us before? What if she forgets me? What if I go back and she gets sick again? All he could do was hold her hand and be honest. I don't know. But whatever happens, I'm not going anywhere. I'm still here. And somehow, that was enough. The story might have ended there. with quiet healing and slow redemption. But life wasn't done testing them. One afternoon, just as the weather began to turn toward spring, Reyes got a call. Sophie had been discharged early, against medical advice. She had missed 2 therapy sessions and hadn't responded to any follow-ups. The rehab center didn't know where she went. She had simply vanished. Emma was in the living room, coloring a picture of a field full of sunflowers, when he got the news. He debated telling her. He didn't want to scare her. But he also couldn't lie. She had lived through too many lies already. So he sat beside her on the floor and told her gently, quietly, what he knew. She stared at him, the marker in her hand frozen mid-stroke. Then she put it down and whispered, "She's running again." "Maybe," he said. "But not from you." Emma nodded. She didn't cry this time. She just wrapped her arms around him and held on like she didn't want the moment to end. For days, Reyes searched. He made calls. Checked shelters. Asked around. But Sophie had disappeared like smoke. And then, one evening, as the sun dipped low and the streets were bathed in gold, Reyes came home to find Emma sitting on the front steps with a note in her hand. "I found it in the mailbox," she said. "It's from her." He took the letter and read it slowly. It was scribbled, rushed, filled with apologies. But at the end, Sophie had written something that stuck: "I'm not strong enough to be the mother she needs. But you are. Don't let her go. Please. She's better with you." Reyes fall. Reyes folded the letter and looked at Emma. "What do you want?" he asked. She stared at him, her eyes wide and clear. "I want to stay home. Home. Not here. Not your place. Home." And with that word, everything changed. After that moment on the steps, something inside Emma seemed to settle. It wasn't dramatic or sudden, it was subtle, like a fog lifting from her small shoulders. She still had hard days, but she laughed more. She started humming when she drew pictures. She asked Reyes to teach her how to make scrambled eggs, even though she cracked the shell straight into the bowl with the yolks and all. One morning, he walked into the kitchen and found her flipping pancakes with a plastic spatula, tongue poking out of the corner of her mouth in concentration. She burned 3 and dropped 1, but she grinned at him and said, "They're still pancakes." He'd never tasted anything better. They fell into a rhythm. Sundays were for park walks and hot chocolate. Weekdays were for school, and late-night storybooks, and the occasional animated movie on the couch. Reyes learned the little things that made Emma feel safe: keeping the nightlight on, knocking softly before entering her room, making sure the fridge was never empty. She learned the little things about him too: that he hated olives, that he kept old coins in a jar by the sink, and that he snored when he fell asleep watching TV. It was simple. It was imperfect. And it was everything she'd ever wanted. But it wasn't permanent. One morning, nearly 5 months after Emma came to live with him, Reyes was called into the station for a meeting with CPS. The air was stiff in the office. Caseworker Monica Hill sat across from him with a thin file and a rehearsed look on her face. "We received contact from Sophie Carter," she said. "She's entered a new rehabilitation program voluntarily. She's working through the steps again. She's requesting reunification." Reyes's jaw tightened. After abandoning her daughter for months? She left a note. That counts for something. It doesn't count for trust. She's still the biological mother, Officer Reyes. And unless there's proof of direct abuse or negligence beyond the overdose, the law leans toward family preservation. He wanted to argue. He wanted to stand and shout that family was more than biology, that love wasn't defined by bloodlines but by who stayed when everything else fell apart. But he knew the system. He knew its limits. So he stayed quiet, fists clenched, heart burning. That night, he didn't tell Emma. He watched her fall asleep with her stuffed bear tucked under her chin and her sketchbook resting on her chest, and he wondered how he could protect something so fragile in a world that didn't know how to hold delicate things. Weeks passed, and Sophie's letters started arriving again. They were steadier this time. Thoughtful. Thoughtful. She was still in rehab, attending parenting classes, meeting with her assigned counselor. She expressed regret. Ownership. Love. Emma read the letters, but this time, she didn't just fold them away. She started writing back. Reyes watched it happen like watching spring break through winter, slow but real. Emma would sit at the table, chewing her pencil, scribbling messages in her neatest handwriting. Sometimes she'd ask him how to spell hard words like forgiveness or better. Sometimes she'd ask nothing at all. The letters didn't talk about the overdose. They talked about memories, picnics in the park, songs they used to sing, bedtime stories whispered in the dark. And then, one day, she asked the question he'd been dreading. "Do you think she'll get me back?" Reyes took a long breath. "She might. If she's really trying. Would you be mad if I wanted to see her again?" "Never," he said. "Never, Emma. You deserve to love your mom. I just want you to be safe. And happy." Emma nodded and looked down at the bear in her lap. "Can I be both?" He didn't have an answer. Not yet. By the 7th month, the court granted supervised visitation. Sophie arrived at the family center with her hair pulled back and a nervous smile on her face. She'd gained a little weight. Her eyes were clearer. She wore a second-hand sweater and carried a folder of drawings and poems she said she wrote in group therapy. When Emma saw her, she froze in the doorway. Then she ran. They held each other for so long the staff let the clock run over. Sophie cried. Emma didn't. She just held on and whispered, "Please don't go away again." Sophie nodded into her hair and said, "I won't." After that, visitation became weekly. Reyes always waited outside, pacing the parking lot or drinking lukewarm coffee from a paper cup. He told himself he wasn't nervous. But he was. Each visit chipped away at something inside him. He'd spent months building a life with Emma, learning her rhythms, holding her hand through every fear. Now he was watching that bond blur. It hurt, but he knew it wasn't about him. It was about what was best for her. He just didn't know what that was anymore. Then came the court date. The hall outside the courtroom was buzzing with voices and footsteps and the low hum of tension. Reyes sat on one side, Sophie on the other. Emma sat between them, her small hands resting on both of theirs. When the judge entered, everyone stood. The hearing was brief. Sophie's attorney presented her progress. The rehab reports. The parenting logs. Reyes gave his statement. How Emma had thrived. How stable her life had become. He didn't smear Sophie. He didn't need to. He told the truth. Then the judge turned to Emma. "Would you like to speak, young lady?" Emma stood. Her knees shook slightly, but her voice didn't. "I love my mommy," she said. "And I love Officer Reyes. I don't want to have to pick. I want both." The room went still. The judge leaned forward. "Do you mean you want to live with both of them?" Emma nodded. "I want to stay here. At his house. But I want to visit my mommy a lot. I don't want anything to change again." The judge leaned back in her chair and tapped her pen against her chin. "You're a very brave girl, Emma." After reviewing the full case, the court ruled in favor of a joint custodial arrangement. Emma would remain in Reyes's legal care while Sophie continued outpatient recovery and weekly visitation. Reunification would remain an open possibility, but only after sustained progress. That night, as they drove home, Emma rested her head on Reyes's shoulder and whispered, that means I get to stay, right? Yeah, sweetheart. You get to stay. She smiled and said, good. This is home. The weeks that followed were gentle. Life didn't explode or unravel, it settled. Emma returned to her usual routines, school during the day, cartoons in the evening, late-night stories whispered under blankets. Reyes returned to his beat, walking neighborhoods with a new understanding of how fragile and fierce children could be. Sophie visited every Saturday afternoon, and though their time was supervised, it was warm and real. They painted, they baked cookies, they sat on park benches talking about the silly shapes clouds could take. Sometimes, Emma would glance at Reyes across the room and smile, like she was making sure he was still watching, still close, still hers. And every time, he nodded. He never missed the look. But Sophie wasn't just visiting to tick off court-mandated boxes anymore. She began doing the real work. She got a job at a thrift store and enrolled in community college part-time. Her rehab counselor reported nothing but progress. She joined a support group for single mothers recovering from addiction and wrote an open letter for their newsletter titled, "The Day I Lost My Daughter and Found Myself." She didn't hide from what she'd done anymore. She owned it. She didn't wallow in shame, she rebuilt from it. The bond between mother and daughter, once shattered, slowly wove itself back together, not perfectly, but with golden seams, like those ancient bowls repaired with lacquer and gold. Stronger. More beautiful because of the breaks. Emma didn't forget the fear. She remembered the loneliness. But now she had love on both sides, and more importantly, she had voice, choice, and safety. One spring evening, Reyes picked Emma up from school, and she handed him a folded piece of paper. "You have to read it when we get home," she said. "Promise." He promised. When they arrived, she ran ahead, kicking off her shoes and calling back, "Read it on the porch." Reyes sat down on the front steps, unfolded the note, and read the words in her uneven handwriting. "Dear Officer Reyes. Thank you for following me that day. I know I was crying and scared and small. But you came anyway. You didn't laugh. You didn't say wait. You just came. I think that's what love is. Someone who comes when it's hard. Love, Emma. Your daughter forever if you want." He read it twice before he realized his hands were trembling. The porch light hadn't come on yet, and the street was bathed in that soft, gold-pink twilight that made everything look gentler. He looked up and saw Emma watching him from the screen door, bare in one arm, eyes waiting for his reaction. He held up the note and said, "I'll keep this forever." She smiled like the sun coming up. That summer, Sophie approached him with a plan. "I'm not asking to change anything," she said. "But I want to move into the neighborhood. I want Emma to know I'm close. That she's not being bounced between two strangers." Reyes considered it. "You're sure that's what's best for her?" "I'm sure it's what's best for me. So I can keep showing up. Even if it's just one playground swing at a time." A month later, Sophie moved into a small two-bedroom apartment 4 blocks down. Emma decorated her new room with drawings, and Reyes helped carry boxes. It wasn't conventional. But it worked. Emma had 2 homes. 2 guardians. 2 people who showed up when it mattered. One Saturday, as Reyes walked Emma to her mom's apartment, she tugged on his hand. "Can I call you Dad now? Just, if I want?" He stopped mid-step. She looked up at him, eyes wide, scared to ruin the moment. He crouched down and placed both hands on her shoulders. "Only if it's what you want, kiddo. I don't need any titles to love you." She nodded slowly, thoughtful. "Okay. Then you're Dad. But also Officer Reyes. Like a superhero." He laughed, breath catching in his throat. "That works for me." They arrived at Sophie's door. She opened it with flour on her hands and a mixing bowl under her arm. "We're baking lemon cake today," she said. Emma ran inside. Sophie smiled at Reyes. "She called you Dad, didn't she?" He nodded. "She practiced it all morning. She wanted to get it right." He exhaled and leaned against the doorframe. "I don't know what any of this is supposed to look like, but it looks like this," she said. "Messy. Beautiful. Shared." And she was right. In time, Emma grew taller. Her drawings became more detailed, her questions more curious, her fears smaller. Her story was still hers, the trauma, the fear, the night she ran barefoot and sobbing to the police station, but now, it had more chapters. Chapters about healing, about people who didn't give up, about second chances and the families we build, not just the ones we're born into. Years later, when she stood at her high school graduation podium and gave her speech as valedictorian, she said, "When I was 6, I ran into a police station barefoot and crying. I asked an officer to follow me home. And he did. But what he found wasn't just a house in trouble. He found a little girl who needed to be seen. To be safe. To be loved. And he stayed. He stayed when it was messy. He stayed when it was hard. And today, I get to say thank you, for following me when I didn't even know how to ask." The entire gym stood on their feet. Reyes cried, openly and without shame. So did Sophie. So did half the teachers. It had been a long road. Full of heartbreak and healing, cracks and courage. But they made it. Together. And the girl who once cried in the night, begging someone to follow her home, now stood in the light of everything she'd become, strong, brave, and loved beyond words.